Hello everybody, welcome to this. It's the first in a two-part video series on context. Everything you see in this video comes from Mr. Bruff's Guide to A-Level English Literature, which was written by Kerry Lewis, aka Mrs. Spag on Twitter, and you can pick up the revision guide for £4.99 at mrbruff.com or amazon.co.uk. So we're moving on to AO3, demonstrate understanding of the significance and influence of the contexts in which literary texts are written and received. And I'm going to go through contexts in a lot of detail, and I've broken it up into two videos today and tomorrow. So if you're doing the legacy specification, this assessment objective is numbered as AO5, but in the specification for teaching from 2015 onwards, this is AO3. Now, some people define context as a backdrop, in other words, what was happening when the text was set. Another definition is anything beyond the words of the text that help you to understand its meaning. There are different kinds of context and they often overlap, and I'm going to go through a number of examples. It's always useful to know about context because your awareness of events will improve your understanding and analysis of character, theme and authorial intention. Okay, so let's have a look at a few of the different contexts, to begin with biographical context. This is information about the author's life which might help you to understand his or her choice of subject matter and attitudes within the text. For example, Charles Dickens hated trains. Trains were a marvellous Victorian invention, so why were his views so negative? Well, on 9th of June 1865 he was in the Staplehurst rail crash, in which his train was derailed, killing 10 passengers and injuring 40. The accident affected him so badly he lost his voice for 2 weeks and for the rest of his life avoided travelling by train if he could. Now, in his short story The Signal Man, he describes a railway cutting with its dripping wet walls of jagged stone as a great dungeon with a gloomy red light at the entrance of a black tunnel which has a barbarous, depressing and forbidding air, an earthly deadly smell and cold wind rush through it. You can see his fear and trepidation of railways is seen in his use of death imagery and his sense of being trapped. So understanding the biographical context there helps us to get an understanding of the author's intentions when he's writing. Secondly, cultural context. So cultural context refers to the beliefs, values, ideas, customs and behaviours that people have at the time a text is written or set. These ideas might be influenced by a person's gender, race, age, class, or by their attitudes to others of a different gender, race, age, or class. The cultural context relates to the attitudes that are considered normal in a particular society. Published in 1852, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe was the second best-selling book of the 19th century after the Bible. A year after it was published, 300,000 copies had been sold in America, an incredibly high number for the time. The abolitionist movement was stronger in the UK, where over 1 million copies were sold. Now, at that time, slavery in America was legal, and in the Deep South, acceptable. But Stowe shows her readers the reality of slavery in an attempt to challenge contemporary attitudes and develop a new anti-slavery culture. Geographical context is another one. Considering the geographical context or settings can help to deepen your understandings of texts. In Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, for example, Lydia leaves her family for a holiday in Brighton. Not quite this modern Brighton, but Brighton, which is on the south coast. Now, because of the conduct of the Prince Regent, who spent a lot of his leisure time there, the seaside town had a reputation for loose behaviour, and this location therefore symbolises danger for the badly chaperoned Lydia. When she and Mr. Wickham disappear in London, the setting is appropriate for their illicit relationship, as London is an easy place in which to hide, and Lydia eventually marries Mr. Wickham and they move to the north of England, symbolising they will never as a couple be welcome at the heart of respectable society. In contrast, when Lydia's sister Elizabeth travels, she visits Derbyshire, which is in the centre of England and as far away from the coast as it is possible to get. Not only this, but she is chaperoned by her aunt and uncle, and this represents her status as a respectable young lady in a polite, safe environment. Moreover, Derbyshire was known as a fashionable beauty spot, and so it was a socially acceptable place to visit. With the Peak District being a beauty spot, this adds an air of romance to her holiday. So in literature, there might be real geographical settings, fictional places located in actual settings, or imaginary places. Always consider which geographical features are real and which have been included, why they've been included, and whether these features are essential to the story, whether the geography limits the story, and the extent to which the writer has altered geography as well as possible reasons for this. Another context is the historical context. Quite often this has links to other kind of contexts such as cultural, political, social, personal and literary. Consider key historical events that influence the writer's purpose. For example, when studying World War I poetry, you cannot ignore the war, its impact on the soldiers, on non-combatants, and on later generations. Attitudes at the beginning of the war were also different to those at the end. Writers such as Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon chose to describe the harsh reality of war, which was a direct contrast to the earlier patriotic sonnets of Rupert Brooke. If Brooke hadn't died in 1915, it would have been interesting to see if his poetry had evolved along the same lines as Owen and Sassoon. Text might be also set in a deliberately Text might deliberately be set in an earlier historical period. H.G. Wells's horror story The Red Room makes a point of describing unfriendly old people, an old mirror, and other old-fashioned furniture to develop the idea of another age, an older age, an age when things spiritual were indeed to be feared, when common sense was uncommon, an age when omens and witches were credible and ghosts beyond denying. This plants seeds in the reader's mind, suggesting that supernatural events are possible, which make later events more terrifying. Do subscribe to the channel. In the next video I'll cover some more contexts.